Hey, this is Brian with King Grizzly. I'm excited today to share an image optimization method I've come up with for WordPress. If you're anything like me, working with images in WordPress can be frustrating, and there are certain pain points that drive me crazy and that I've had trouble figuring out. But I've come up with a method that gets at a lot of these pain points and gets really good scores on a WordPress site and even in my Elementor site. You don't have to use Elementor, but this method seems to work with Elementor. So I'm excited to show you what I'm doing. I think it has the potential to change people's workflows. I'm also looking for critique in case I'm making a mistake here because this actually seems to be working well. So let me show you what I've been doing. First, I want to talk about the results I got, and then I want to talk about the pain points I was solving, and then I'll show you how I set the whole thing up. So in terms of results, well, I put together a landing page as a test, right? So I built this in Elementor. I don't have to use Elementor for this method to work, but I happen to use it. I put in some large image files here. I tried to put some things on the page to slow it down, like a carousel and a form. So it's a pretty full page. And then I did my technique and I scored it. So on Google, this is mobile. I got a 99 for my page speed score. There's some things I could try to improve, but for an Elementor site, people claim that Elementor's slow. I'm getting a 99. Blocking time's pretty low. Desktop score is 100. If I do Metrix, if I go to Metrix, I get 100. No blocking time. It's not complaining about the images. So these are good results. And like I said, I wasn't trying to optimize the page that much. I was just working on the images. So let's talk about what are the pain points I was working on. So with WordPress and images, one pain point I have is when I upload a file, this is what happens in the server, right? I upload a file, and then WordPress creates a whole bunch of different sizes of that file. And then if I'm using an image optimization plugin, likely what happens is it creates even more versions of the file, right? Like WebP versions and different sizes. And I get this uploads folder that's gigantic. And what that can do is run up the cost of client hosting on websites. It can also just make things really hard to work with, and you get these gigantic uploads folders. So that drives me nuts. This was one pain point. The next was inside of the back end of WordPress. When I work on an image, like this image size drop down, what you're seeing now is the result of what I set up. I have just one size full, but normally, and I'll show this here shortly, there's a whole bunch of sizes to choose from. It's like, well, what size do I choose? And then the other pain point is how do I deliver the right size image for somebody's browser when a browser can be all different sizes? And how do I get them the best format that they can run, right? Because there's different formats. There's JPEG, PNG, now there's WebP, there's something called AVIF. And it's like I want to give them the best version of a file I can, but it just gets overwhelming, right? So I think we can get at all of this where we just upload one file size. The uploads folder has one copy of that file, and we will deliver the right size image no matter how big their browser window is, if they're on Retina. So let's jump into what I did to get at those pain points. So let's look at how WordPress normally works with images. I've reset my landing page here to just have a bunch of placeholder images. I've turned off all my optimization settings so we can show what happens normally. So here, if I go to settings, media, on the back end of WordPress, these are kind of the typical settings when you install a WordPress site, right? It's got the sizes for thumbnail, medium, large. I think this crop thumbnail is turned on, and then this organize uploads into month and year based folders is turned on. So let's see what happens if I'm working on a page and I put some images in, right? So I'm just gonna drop in, I don't know, 2 or 3 images from Unsplash. So here's one. I do have a few images in there from the landing page we can ignore. They're SVGs. And then I'll put 1 or 2 more in. These are pretty good sized files. Put another one in. And we'll go ahead and we'll pick a size for them, right? So instead of full, we'll go with, I don't know. In the past, I'd be like, I don't know, maybe this is large, right? Maybe this one here is that medium? I don't know, right? So that was the thing I was always confused about. So we'll just do a couple, right? And then I'm going to update my page. And if we look at the front end, okay, they loaded in. Now, let's look at our FTP server, right? So I'm going to pull up the uploads folder. Let me refresh. Check out what happens. So we can ignore these SVGs that I already had in there. Elementor keeps its own folder in there. So ignore all my SVGs. But this is what happened. A 2023 folder was created with the month of January because that's when I'm making this. And inside of that, what do we see? We see my images and then the different sizes that WordPress is making to try to accommodate these pictures, right? And you can see it even made what's called a scaled one. So if an image is larger than a certain width, I can't remember the dimensions, it's like 2,360 pixels or something like that. If your image is bigger than that, then what WordPress does is it makes what it calls a scaled version. But you'll notice it still put the original in there as well. But you can see the bloat is already starting to happen after 2 images. And additionally, I don't like these nested folders. The uploads folder gets really out of hand. So that's what WordPress is doing by default. And if we're using an optimization plugin, there's going to be even more clutter going on. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to just upload the one image and have one image on the server. But let's do some page scoring before we do that, right? So right now, I've only put in 2 images, but I'm going to go ahead and rescore my pages and we'll see what I get. So this is with no optimization really turned on. This is just WordPress out of the box with 2 images on an Elementor page. I do have some of the Elementor experiments turned on, so maybe it will optimize a little bit. But let's see what kind of scores we get with just those 2 images. So you can see I got a 76 on mobile. Timed interactive is 4.3 seconds. Blocking times 170 milliseconds. And you can see it's complaining, look, you need to properly size your images. So even though I tried to pick a size large, it didn't work in terms of being optimized. Um, I'm not sure this one ran correctly. GT Metrix is pretty generous, but look, properly sized images, it's telling me, look, you could be doing better with your images, which is true. Okay, so now let's take the next steps. How do we get to where we just have the one image on the server? So I put the page back in time to where I just had my placeholder images, and now here's what we need to do. We're going to go over to our media settings, so settings, media, and first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off these checkboxes. I don't want those nested folders. Maybe that would be useful for some organizations. I've never met a client that it was actually very useful for, and it makes it really hard to look through the uploads folder. I'm going to turn off this cropping feature, and then I'm actually going to zero these values out across the board. So WordPress won't generate these 3 sizes when I upload an image. So I'm going to save that. But we're not done. We need to open a functions file. And what we should do is set up a child theme. I'm not going to explain how to do a child theme here, but for whatever your theme is, you need to set up a child. And so I happen to be using Elementor. So if we open my FTP, I go to WP content, get in your WP content folder, go to themes, make sure you have a child theme with a functions file properly set up. There's plenty of great videos about how to do that. So I'm going to open the functions file for Elementor hello. Okay, so this is in there by default. We can ignore that. First thing we want to add is this. And I can post the snippet. So what it is we're going to remove the image sizes that get generated here. So we're unsetting these, right? So I've got the 150, the 300, the 768, 1536, etc. There may be more sizes you need to unset, possibly depending on your theme. I'm not sure, but for WordPress, I think this gets at most of the normal ones, right? So now when we upload an image, it shouldn't generate all those sizes. But there's 2 more steps I want to show you. If you're on Elementor, this applies to you. We're going to add another snippet. Well, first, let me show you what happens if we don't. So I'm going to save this. And then we will go to, let's see, my page. I'm going to refresh this page. And when I click on an image, even though we told WordPress not to make those sizes anymore, when we click on one, you can see Elementor still shows these controls. So even though if I upload an image, it shouldn't be generating all these sizes, Elementor still shows these controls. So we need another snippet in here. And this one will get rid of all these controls in Elementor. So you don't have to do this if you're not an Elementor. If you are, though, I'm going to save that. And that should get rid of the controls once that file has uploaded to the server. Click on an image. Look, now I can only choose full. I don't have all those other choices. So let's try uploading an image and then just see what happens in our uploads folder. So I'll go choose one of these Unsplash images I grabbed earlier. There's one. We'll insert that. It's a large file, 2560 wide. So I'm going to insert that. Well, you can see already it says India scaled. The file was called india.jpg. So WordPress is already scaling it. I'm gonna update the page. That is a great photo. Okay, let's go to our server. I'm gonna go to the uploads folder, WP content uploads, and okay. So what happened is the original is in here, India, but you can see India scaled was created because we hit that max threshold. Now, if we want, it is possible in the functions file to disable that. So right here. Okay, yeah, so it's this snippet here, completely disable the image size threshold. So if we do this, it will no longer create scaled images. And then we would just have the one size image, no matter how big that is. What I typically do is I will save images for web first out of something like Photoshop, maybe at a max width of 2000 pixels or something like that. So the file sizes are already compressed, so I'm not worried about it. I also teach my clients to do that. However, if we don't want the browser trying to deliver an insanely huge image, you may want to leave that on, although I think my method gets around that. It is possible if you add one more snippet here. Let's see here. Yes. There's one here where you can set that threshold to a value, right? So I'll put all these in the description, but like you could set it to say 4,000. So maybe you don't want an image to trigger at a smaller size to generate that scaled version. These snippets here would disable the default. And if you want, you can keep that scaled functionality here and set any value you want. That's up to you. To get this method to work, you really only need the first snippet to disable the generation of those image sizes. And if you're in Elementor, you probably do want to turn those controls off. But if I turn all of this on, then this will happen at 4,000 pixels, the scaled version. So what we'll do, we're going to add a couple more images, and then we'll score the page, and it will get a pretty bad score. And then we'll add a couple plugins, and we should get a great score again. So let me just add a couple more images in. Maybe I'll add a few just to make sure there's plenty of good sized images in the site. So put in the mountain. Maybe I'll put in a picture of my friend running. There we go. Maybe a ski picture of my other friend. And why not one more big picture from Unsplash. Space image. And I'm gonna set these to full. I don't know if I have to choose one. I don't think I do, but I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Stay with me because it's gonna be worth this. I'd like to put. So my audio cuts out here for about 20 seconds, but we're not missing much. Just adding one more large photo, and then I will head over to the server to take a look at what happens inside of it, and then we'll score the page. Anyway, their file sizes aren't too bad. I could have compressed them more out of Photoshop, but I kind of put in intentionally big images for this test. Okay, now let's rerun our scores. Maybe just refresh this page, and then I'll rerun GTmetrix. And what we should see are some pretty bad scores. Because we now have these large full-size images, so they're not being sized down. There's no optimization happening yet, but that's the secret part of this that hopefully you will find kind of amazing. I did. But maybe there's a flaw. If someone sees a flaw, please point it out. So just a moment while we get our scores. Okay, so Google's down to 60 now. Look at the time to interactive, 18.6 seconds, a lot of blocking time. And of course, it's going to be complaining about the images not being sized properly, not served in next generation formats, right? It's just not good. And then GT Metrix, still incredibly generous for some weird reason. But look, avoid enormous network payloads, 6 megabytes, properly size your images. Okay, so now let's look at 2 plugins that are going to help us finish this method. Okay, the moment we've all been waiting for. What do we do to get those great scores and to deliver the perfectly sized image? Now we've only got 1 image on the server for each option. So let's go over to plugins. This is a plugin-based solution. What we need is a plugin called Optimole. So I have Optimole here. So I'm going to activate it. I'm going to show you the settings I use. There's a lot of great image optimization ones. This one just happens to be one that does something a little different than any of the others I saw. I'm going to go over to the Optimole settings. What it does is it takes that image from your media library, pulls it to the Optimole server, and creates all these different next-gen formats for the image, and then it will deliver the precisely right size image for somebody's browser depending on different factors, like if it's retina. So that's different than some of these plugins which just generate a ton of different image sizes. There may be other plugins which also do this. I just happened to find this one after testing a bunch. So if we look at the settings, there are some really important settings we need to get right for this method to work. So I'll show you how I have mine set up. So first of all, enable image replacement. And then also, so we're going to replace the image URLs with ones optimized by Optimole. For the SEO people who are worried about this, we'll get to that in a second. Scale images and lazy load. We definitely want lazy load turned on and scaling images. If we go to advanced for the compression, this is what I've turned on. I enable this AVIF conversion. I actually turn off the machine learning on the auto quality and I just set it to high for images, but you can play with these settings. I'm not serving my CSS or anything JavaScript through Optimole, but there's options here, and you can even have GIFs converted to videos. For resize, I turn on retina images, and you also have some control options for controlling large images. Now the thing about this is lazy loading. If you don't lazy load your image from the Optimole server, then I believe the SEO credit for that image may go to the Optimole image server. However, I talked to their support because this is a big deal to me, and they said anything you lazy load will get what they call a canonical link. So it will tell Google, hey, give the credit for this image back to the original file location in the uploads folder on my site. So if we use lazy loading, that is supposed to be happening. And when I inspected the code, that seemed to be what was happening. So that could be the fatal flaw here. I'd be curious what other people think. So what I do is I don't exclude anything from lazy loading. Like by default, this is set to exclude 2 or 3 images, the first 2 or 3 from lazy loading. I'm okay with the little bit of lag that may happen for those to come in. I don't exclude anything because I want all the SEO credit to go to my site. So I enable this lazy load placeholder. I turn on scaling images. I set that value up there to 0 under excluding the images. I enable lazy loading for background images. That may solve a problem some Elementor users have. I also enable it for videos and iframes. This stuff's important. Like if you don't do this, I think it could hurt SEO. And just as an FYI, you can exclude images and by class or other variables here if you don't want something to be affected by Optimole. So we're turning on Optimole, and it will take a little bit to pull the images up to their server. And the way it works is they wait for someone to visit the site. So I need to come here and refresh this page. And now Optimole, like these images are going to go get optimized at Optimole once somebody visits the site. So that's the first step. The second step is I would recommend turning on some sort of a performance optimization plugin. I happen to use WP Rocket. So I'm going to go to plugins and I'm going to turn on WP Rocket. This is a popular solution. There's others, but it does definitely help. So I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to dump the cache. I'll show you my WP Rocket settings for those who are curious. My camera's in the way here. WP Rocket. Okay. All right. So I tend to have to play with this per site and see how things go, right? But this is what seemed to work during my tests. So I've minified my CSS. I turned on optimized CSS delivery. I've minified my JavaScript files. I'm deferring the JavaScript. I'm delaying the JavaScript execution. But you'll have to try these with your site and see which ones you can get away with. It seems to vary by site. I also am turning on this feature to add missing image dimensions. That's most of it. If I click around on these other tabs, I do have caching enabled for mobile devices. I have preloading turned on for this site, and I don't think I did much else. Um, yeah. Okay, so we'll need to make sure that we give the site and Optimole and WP Rocket time to cache. So it's a good idea to dump your caches, refresh your pages, and then we will rescore and see how we did. Now that WP Rocket's turned on, I'm going to refresh my page to make sure that it's still working, because sometimes WP Rocket can break things. A good trick to make sure you're not cached, besides dumping your cache on your web hosting, is if you type a question mark and a nonsense word at the end of your URL and hit return, sometimes that will force the browser to load an uncached version of the page. But it looks like everything's working as expected. This carousel works. So I think my page is working. So we'll go back over to Google. And remember, we got a 60 last time, 18-second timed interactive, lots of complaints about the images. So we are going to rerun this. And then on Metrix is very friendly, but it still complained about a 6 megabyte payload and properly sizing my images. So we're going to run this again, and we'll see what we get. We have to be patient though, because like I said, Optimole and WP Rocket, sometimes it takes a little while. Like I've even come back, I don't know, a couple hours later on a site and noticed that everything kicked in. Okay, look. So now we get a 99 mobile on Google. 1 second timed interactive, no blocking time, and those image warnings are gone. The only one that's there is actually related to my SVGs. I didn't set an explicit width or height on those, but that's okay. I could rectify that separately. That's a different thing. But in terms of those raster images from Unsplash, look, we're getting great scores again on desktop. We're getting great scores. Metrix similarly, 100 and 100. The warnings about the giant 6 megabyte images are gone. So I think this method looks really promising, right? We get the one image, you just pick full size. Even if somebody uploads a giant image, Optimole should be smart enough to serve up the right size image. Looks great on retina, and when combined with something like WP Rocket, it seems to do well with page scores. So I'm curious what people think. That SEO question with the lazy loading is the big question in my mind, although it seems like it's working with the canonical credit. Yeah, anyway, curious what the WordPress community thinks, the Elementor community. This seems like a pretty big find for me. So yeah, thanks for watching. If this was helpful, please consider subscribing or sharing this content, and I hope you have a good day.